education is empowering. I think for the most part, it is a very frightening subject for parents, and I can understand that. But what I'm trying to do is educate parents, because education is empowering. And once you know what the problem is, you're in a better position to protect your child, because the alternative can be a lot worse.
Hello, I'm Olivia D'Souza. I'm a multi-passionate entrepreneur. I'm a content and podcast expert. I support visionary entrepreneurs and leaders passionate about living with purpose. Join me as we explore podcasting, life, business, and authenticity. Subscribe for meaningful conversations with a business buddy who gets what it's like. Welcome to Magnetic Pod. I'm stepping in the next level me. Hello and welcome to another episode of Magnetic Pod. Today I'm really excited and honoured to be joined by Jen Hoey. Jen is the founder of Not My Kid, and her journey began with a personal experience that many parents fear or even don't want to think about when her daughter had an encounter online with a predator. This harrowing event, along with her experience in managing her husband's psychiatric practice and observing the impact of social media and gaming and porn and all sorts of things on teens, propelled Jen into action, and she founded Not My Kid to empower parents with the knowledge and tools needed to safeguard their children in the ever-evolving online world. As an advocate for parental awareness and a cyber safety consultant, Jen is also furthering her experience and expertise with a degree in criminology and criminal justice. So she's here to share her insights. I am also very honoured to play a small role in helping Jen's a client. So I help her share all the social media stuff online to get the message out there, and really honoured to have you on the podcast so we can continue getting this very, very important message out there. So this is one to definitely stay tuned. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much, Livy, for having me.
Yes, it's long overdue, actually. So we need to get this message out. And so if you're listening, listen to the end. It's so worthwhile, and you'll be empowered by sticking around and hearing what Jen has to share. So how about we start with the moment that started it for you, how you realised it can happen to your kid and how that was a pivotal moment for you?
Well, when my daughter was 11, she came to me one night and she was really distressed. And she said to me, "Mummy, I've done something terrible." I went into her bedroom and I asked her if she could tell me anything more. And she simply shook her head and wrote 2 words on a piece of paper. And those words were sex and game. Now, in that moment, I had a feeling I may know what she was trying to tell me. But despite my internal feelings of distress, concern, panic, I sat down and comforted her. And I asked her if she could tell me a little bit more. What she told me was that she'd done the one thing that I'd warned her not to do. She went onto the chat of a game and she started talking to another 9-year-old little girl. She said to me she went back a few times to chat to this little girl, and this little girl eventually coerced her into performing sex acts within the game. And then she was threatened that she would be arrested by the police. At that point, she panicked. She did not go back on the game. Now, I should say that her confession came 2 years after the incidents that took place. And during that time, we noticed a child who used to be lively. I mean, the best way to describe my daughter was it would be difficult to walk away from her without a smile on your face. She really was the very essence of life. And overnight, she changed. She began to become very listless. She began to eat a lot less. She developed extreme separation anxiety from me in particular. It got to the point where I couldn't go to the supermarket alone. And I had no idea what had caused this dramatic change in her. I eventually took her to a pediatrician who diagnosed her with clinical depression and medicated her for some time. Now, I think the trigger that caused her to disclose to me was that in year 6, there's a sex education in New South Wales called Interrelate, and the school had sent out a note saying that could we give permission for our children to participate in this class. And at the time, she kept saying, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I didn't understand that because we'd had relatively open conversations about sex in our home. But I can see now that was a trigger because it was only a few days after that she called me into her bedroom. In that moment, I just comforted her. I did say to her, sometimes when we do the wrong thing, we don't always feel our warning signs. She was quite startled that I wasn't angry with her, that I wasn't upset. But, what I said to her is, you were a little girl, you were curious, and I believe that this person was an adult. Now, at that point, she couldn't accept that. And I sat with her until she fell asleep that night. But the next day, I called the police. I knew I wasn't calling to make a report. I knew I was calling, in a sense, to find out if they had a list of games on their website that predators were known to frequent. And the police officer, who was extremely empathetic on the phone, said to me, they're on all the games. And then he gave my daughter a message. And he said, please tell your daughter she's innocent. This is predatory behavior. They always threaten the child. And sometimes they leave the child too afraid to ever make a disclosure. And so I told my daughter that I'd called the police. She panicked and thought that the police were coming to get her. But in fact, I said to her, no, this is what they want me to tell you. And she quietly absorbed this. And I think that in that moment, she found some sense of comfort. But it took many years for her to fully recover. And what I did in order to cope was I decided to get educated. I sat up late at night attending in-hope webinars. I followed cyber safety experts. I read journals. I found as much information as I possibly could about this issue. And the issue is online child sexual exploitation. And I eventually enrolled in a degree in criminology and criminal justice. I just really wanted to understand why and how bad this problem was.
And it sounds like you already had a background and understanding, because you mentioned in that conversation with her, you mentioned warning signs, early warning signs. Now, that's something I've heard of through you and through working with Caroline Ellen, to social worker, doing education. Not everyone. Can you tell us what early warning signs are for a start? Not everyone knows what that means.
They're the warning signs in your body. That these signs can be different. So it could be a stomach ache. It could be a feeling of not being able to breathe. It could be sweaty hands, maybe even shaking legs. But it's an indication to us, to our body, that something's up, something's not quite right. And what I say to parents is early warning signs don't always signify danger. So sometimes children are afraid to go to the dentist, for example. But I've reinforced to my children that every time they feel those feelings within their body, they need to come and tell me. And I will establish whether the situation is safe or unsafe. Because ultimately, it's adults who have to keep children safe.
It is. Yeah. And something I just want people to know too is that I've learned that sadly, most times children actually do finally disclose. They're not believed. They have to tell something like 8 times or something, I believe.
Exactly.
So maybe because they're using the wrong words, or maybe because the parent's busy at the time, or for whatever reasons. Do you know what? There's something I've never mentioned to you. I don't think I've mentioned to you. I can't believe I haven't mentioned this to you. Did you know that I wrote a song about this? I wrote
No.
Oh my goodness. I have to share this song with you, by the way. It's called I Can Use My Voice. And it's actually to help children recognize. How can I not share this with you? How dumb is that? I'll share it with you. It's I Can Use My Voice, and it goes through the body safety stuff and basically incorporate. You can tell when you're ready, you can tell, and keep telling until someone believes, and all of that. I'll put a link in the show notes and tell you and share that song with you.
Yeah, and it's really sad that children have to repeat themselves so many times. But I think that often they may be using incorrect terminology. That's why it's so important to teach our children the correct words for their body parts. But I think that it also says something about adults. Children very rarely make a disclosure unless there's some reality behind them. And so when my daughter made that disclosure that night, I took her absolutely seriously. And I think that how we react when children make disclosures is so crucial, because if I'd broken down and cried or got angry, she would have shut down. Instead, I just comforted her and reminded her how innocent she was. And I should say that this did not happen in my home. This happened at someone else's home. because we'd actually had the conversations at home. We'd actually spoken about, online safety. We had rules in place. There was only one iMac in our kitchen and it had parental controls on it. So I found myself really troubled about where this could have taken place. Mm-hmm. She only subsequently told me when she was 15, when I'd written the story.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how old did you say she was again when this happened?
She was 9 when it happened.
9 when she told you?
No, 11 when
11 when she told. And 2 years to tell you, 2 years in a child's life is a big chunk, isn't it? When I look at my kids, they're different people.
Oh, absolutely. And only last week she came to me and said, "Do you know why I couldn't sleep?" And this is an indication of trauma because, we can suppress memories and then they can resurface at odd times. And she just came to me and said, "Do you know why I couldn't sleep when that horrible thing happened to me?" And I said, "Because you were afraid you were going to be arrested?" And she said, "No, because he said he'd come and find me and I thought I'd be killed in my sleep every night. That's why I was so afraid to sleep." And I said to her, that really, really disturbed me. But then I spoke to my husband and he said, "Look, memories can be suppressed. They can pop up at different times. So it's not surprising that she's only just recalled that."
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you went from that experience to educating yourself and then creating the Not My Kid platform. So how has that evolved?
Well, I actually started Not My Kid when my little boy started primary school. And I noticed there were so many children in his class who seemed to have a lot of freedom online. So instead of being that parent who was lecturing other parents, I decided to start a Facebook group where I was just sharing. Initially, I was just sharing information. I hadn't come forward with my own story. It was only a few months later when, in fact, Caroline Ellen encouraged me to write the story. She knew I was really struggling with what had happened. But in fact, I wrote the story. I told my daughter, and she said, "I don't want to read it." But a few weeks later, she asked if she could, and then she asked if she could share it with a friend. And so what it did was it opened this incredible healing journey for both of us, really. It was only a year later when she was 16 that I approached her and I asked her, "How would you feel if I put my name to the story?" And she said, her answer surprised me because I honestly thought she would say, "No, we don't share the same last name." So I think that was a comfort. And we had changed her name in the story. But what she said to me was, "Mummy, you need to be my voice. You need to let other parents know that this can happen to their child." So in many ways, I'm just a messenger. It's because of her bravery that I'm sharing my story with everyone today. And yes, I have a lot of admiration for her.
That's very brave. And I guess that she did it you both did it when you were ready to, but there's something very powerful about sharing stories and then it gives other people permission, or they recognize themselves, or they realize how prevalent it is. I know Caroline, we're mentioning again, as she's a social worker, and you do too, as people hear behind the scenes stories, people actually approach you because they feel safe because you've shared the story. But people don't realize how often it is, and it can be shrouded in shame, can't it? So,
oh, absolutely. That's why I called it a regular story that rarely gets told, because you used the word regular because this is the type of incident that I believe is happening to children all over the world on a regular basis. But the reason I use the word rarely is that because many children struggle with shame. They struggle to disclose. And most importantly, this is not a story that would make newspaper headlines. This is really a minor story in the greater scheme of what can happen online. But it did take 2 years of my daughter's life where she basically became a shell of herself.
What would you say about people who think that they are quite safe because they've set up parental controls?
I would have to say to them that I haven't found a parental control that is adequate in safeguarding children on social media or games. So with games, you have to turn the chat function off. And I would preferably prefer for any online game that doesn't make it online anymore to be played offline, because there are predators all over these games. And on social media, it's very difficult, even if you have some type of control system within the app, it doesn't prevent your child from necessarily seeing the content. So a lot of parents follow their child and they say, okay, I can see what she's posting. I'm checking her messages, but that doesn't necessarily protect them from what they're actually seeing on social media. The algorithms are so powerful these days that it pushes more content that the child wants to view. TikTok is a perfect example of that. And so I would caution parents when parental controls are absolutely necessary, but I would be absolutely supervising any child under the age of 14.
And I think actually people get a bit defensive about just the topic of screens anyway, let alone having to approach this, very heavy subject. So, how have you found dealing with getting the message through?
It's difficult. It's very, very difficult. I mean, I have about 6,000 followers on the Not My Kid page and the same number in the group. And that always gives me some encouragement because it means that there are some parents who are actually interested in understanding the issue. But in my son's class, he's currently in year 4. He's probably one of the only children who's supervised online. And he doesn't get to game. He doesn't have social media. He has no iPad, no phone, no devices of his own. And I think for the most part, it is a very frightening subject for parents. And I can understand that. But what I'm trying to do is educate parents because education is empowering. And once you know what the problem is, you're in a better position to protect your child because the alternative can be a lot worse.
So how do you handle what would you want to say to a parent who's listening who maybe has had an incident happen and, they might be worried about what will Jen think? I can't speak to her. I let my child on. I wasn't supervising. I was a bit lax, all that kind of thing. What would you want them to know?
I would want them to know I have been there. I never thought this would happen to my child. That's part of the reason why I called the group or the company Not My Kid, because I never thought it would ever happen to my child. I have a lot of empathy for parents in terms of incidents. And I've had parents reach out to me with incidents. And I come from a very non-judgmental approach. This is a child. This is potentially a victim. And the best way to move forward is to support the family as best as you can. So no, I don't think people should be afraid. I have been there and I can't say more than that. Once you've been there, you understand how hard it is.
Mm-hmm. And I can vouch that you're very understanding, non-judgmental and driven by just a sincere desire to help.
Yes.
So in an ideal world, what would you like to see? Because with television, for the most part, it's regulated. So you can put it on and know, unless it's connected to the internet and they end up using it as something other than a television. But just talking about television, if it's Netflix or ABC Kids or whatever, that each thing on there has been selected and had to jump through some hoops and was chosen to be there. It's not just anyone can upload anything and you don't know what will pop up. So there's safety requirements and ratings and things in place. What would you like to see on the internet? Is there much that could be done if there was a will to make things better?
I think the big tech companies are perfectly capable of putting measures in place to protect children. I think one of the difficulties is we are fast approaching more and more companies going towards end-to-end encryption, which makes it incredibly challenging for law enforcement. That's a huge debate, privacy versus, companies having access to some of your information. I think parents are the best gatekeepers to keep their children safe. And so the one thing that I always encourage parents to do is to not allow devices in bedrooms or bathrooms, because this is really where most of the trouble happens. And we have the dining room table and my son sits at the dining room table if he needs to look up anything on the internet for school. But love to put the onus back on the big tech companies. Yeah, it's a huge issue and it's not getting any easier or any better.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of money to be made.
That's correct.
And not so much incentive for them. And with your background in managing a psychiatric practice, what's your involvement with that? Because that's your...
Yes, so I'm there probably about 50% of the time, and I'm basically the practice manager. So I take in the new referrals, make the appointments. But we have increasingly noticed a decline in the age of referrals, which is a concern. There's an awful lot of children coming through wanting to be diagnosed with ADHD. So that's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And we do have children who are presenting with school refusal because they're basically gaming, and that becomes a huge challenge. Once you walk into a psychiatrist's office with a child who's addicted to gaming and school refusal, it becomes very challenging for the psychiatrist because it ultimately, without pointing fingers, is a parenting issue.
Yeah, it is a parenting issue, and you're probably limited what you can do if you're having to, I'd imagine, just treat the child, where what is needed is education for the parents, because it's so easy to fall into that trap of, I guess, letting your kids get addicted and trying to find a balance, or maybe there shouldn't be no balance and just get rid of it completely. It's challenging when it's against the tide, I guess.
I always say to parents, you need to start as you mean to go on, because your child who listens to your rules when they're 8 or 9 or 10 will be very different when they are 15 or 16. And so I think that you have to have very firm boundaries in place around tech use from a very young age. And you need to also explain to them why. There's no point in just saying, just because I say so. My son of 9 or 10 now, he knows about porn. He knows about predators, cyberbullying, sexting. I've had very honest conversations with him. When I say to him, you're not going to do that, he kind of understands why. And if he asks why, I'll give him an honest answer. I'll say, well, you just don't know who's on the other end of the screen. So I think it's important to remember that, because we have cases in the practice where the police have had to take an AVO out against the child because they've attacked the parent, because they are so addicted to gaming that when the parent says enough, they become violent. And that's really sad, and that's very extreme.
Right, and thinking that's more common with boys.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes, it's definitely more common with boys. Girls become more, absorbed in social media, and that presents a whole lot of other challenges. We've had a spike in eating disorders, and that's because girls are constantly comparing themselves to other girls. I don't know how many, I read somewhere the number of selfies average teenager takes a day, but it was a pretty high number. And they're editing. I think that when children are young, their brains are still underdeveloped. So they necessarily, A, see the risks, and B, they actually often believe what they see. So it's challenging. And the other issue that I have to raise is the one of sextortion, which has become a very, very, very big issue internationally and in Australia. And we're seeing more boys between the ages of 13 and about 17 being targeted by online. Basically, these are syndicates. They're not even necessarily interested in the image. They're interested in the money.
Wow. And on the sexting thing, I had this thought. I remember hearing, basically, I know if I have no naked photos on the internet, that I'm safe and it's not going to get published anywhere. So if you were to share that advice not to sext, which I've heard being advice given out there, that the pushback is, instead of telling us not to send naked photos, why don't you tell people not to share them without permission? I think I've seen this with girls being told not to share naked pictures to boys, and then they're going, instead of telling us not to send naked pictures, tell the boys not to share them around and do all that. So that they feel like the person who's breaking the trust and sharing them is the one that should be called into line.
The issue is nothing online is private. So once you've sent that image, you have no control. And so the best thing is to not to send the image, basically because you lose control. And how do you know genuinely who you're sending it to, or do you really trust them? I mean, a lot of girls are being targeted by predators to send images of themselves. Now we have the added complexity of AI coming in, where there are people reproducing images of children in a sexual context. That's the other thing I say to parents: don't put anything on a public account, because you have no control of those images. I attended a conference in April this year It was held at the Gold Coast. I think it was the Queensland Police. And one of the presenters said how predators are no longer necessarily needing to target children. They're following parents.
Oh my
They're
gosh.
able to take the images and do whatever they want with them. So we have to be really careful with whatever we post online.
It's horrifying, isn't it? I think also, I'd imagine going back to the relationship scenario where you are being asked for pictures, and I guess maybe in that situation people might say, don't you trust me, and that kind of thing. I think to know that you don't have to state that you don't trust somebody. It can be just, it's on the internet, it's not safe, even if it's not the person you're sending it to. There was, because I do remember, was it Jennifer, who's the actress, famous Hollywood actress? Maybe I don't want to name her anyway, but that's all right. There have been famous people who had photos of themselves just taken, not even sent anywhere, but just in the cloud on their iPhones or whatever, and somebody's hacked into the Apple account somehow and they've ended up online anyway. So I guess just having things internet-based, if it's something that you would affect your life to be seen publicly, then, yeah, don't have it on anything internet-based, which is pretty, it's going against how everything's set up these days, but yeah.
Yeah, but that's absolutely spot on. We just have to be really cautious. I think that the sexting debate is a huge one, but I think that, and for young girls, they're often told, well, you're stuck up or you're prudy, and they feel coerced often into sending these images. But I think that it's so unsafe to do that.
All right. Well, we're just about at time. So before we wrap up, is there any final message, anything you would really want people to take away from today?
I think I've raised a couple of these. I'd say to parents, again, please keep your social media accounts private. And this also includes your friends list, because predators can get in that way, see who your friends are, and manage to infiltrate your close network if you want. But also, please keep devices out of bedrooms and bathrooms. This problem isn't going away. And the more of us that can actually implement these boundaries, we potentially have one less victim. And I think that's ultimately really what matters.
I think I'd like to just add, just to open up the conversation out there, share the message with people, have the conversations.
Oh, totally agree with you. And that's hard. That's hard to do. I do it all the time. But you do see people put the blinkers on, not want to know. But there are a few that you manage to reach, which is always rewarding.
Actually, I did say I was wrapping up, but I thought of one more question that I had. A lot of people, sometimes they're talking about they want their child to have a phone, so that they know where they are, or so that they can contact if they're, to keep them safe, a phone to keep them safe. How do you handle that? At what age would you give kids a phone, and what kind of phone would you give them?
Well, my son will be starting. So with my older two, they did get a phone. I had screen time implemented on that. And I had, at the time, it was Family Zone. I think they've been bought out by Custodia. And they had they were gradually allowed social media. So my daughter still does not have Snapchat. She's 19. And they were allowed TikTok at 18. And I had full control of their devices. With my little boy, he's probably going to get a Nokia brick phone when he goes down. And pretty much that's it. But I think it's important to have the conversations, because I know he will be exposed via someone else. There are going to be children at school who, even though New South Wales has now put a blanket ban on mobile phones at school, it doesn't take away traveling on the bus to school. So I have to continually have the conversations with him. Yeah.
Not a tick the box, had that conversation thing.
No. And we talk about it at least once a week, something to do with online safety.
Yes. I feel whenever my son goes, I know, all right, you told me, then I feel like, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah, but you've got to keep raising it, especially as they approach adolescence.
I know. I want to get in before his hormones make him not listen to me anymore. So how can people find you?
My website is notmykid.com.au. Otherwise, there's the Not My Kid parent group on Facebook, or there's the Not My Kid page on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, notmykid_ever. And
And we'll put all the links in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining me today, Jen.
It's a pleasure. It's lovely to be here.
I'm stepping in the next level me. I'm here to be everything I can be. Like a snake, I'm shedding my skin to be my wild next level me. I'm stepping in the next level me. I'm here to be everything I can be. Give you whiplash when you turn around and see me go again. Next level me. It's time to be. Hello, it's Livy here. Have you ever wondered about what the key elements are that make a podcast truly stand out? Or maybe you're thinking about starting your own special podcast and feel a bit overwhelmed and don't know where to start? Well, I have something for you. Introducing the Ultimate Podcast Checklist. Da, 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 da. It's a step-by-step guide that covers everything from the initial brainstorming to advanced growth strategies. It's the perfect companion for both new and seasoned podcasters. And the best part, it's absolutely free. Da, 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 da. To grab your copy, simply head to the show notes of this episode and you will find a direct link there, and then away you go. Remember, every podcast started with that initial spark and the right resource, so let the Ultimate Podcasting Checklist be yours.